The wine glass slipped from my trembling fingers before I could catch it, shattering across the polished marble floor of the Altezza Hotel's grand hallway. The crimson liquid splashed like fresh blood against the pristine white of my uniform skirt, the stain spreading rapidly through the cheap fabric. I dropped to my knees immediately, frantically gathering the broken shards with bare hands, my vision blurring with unshed tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," I whispered to no one in particular, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was my third week at the five-star hotel, and I couldn't afford another mistake, not with rent due in 3 days and my bank account hovering dangerously close to zero. The hallway was mercifully empty, the high-paying guests either still enjoying their 7-course dinner in the ballroom or already retired to their luxury suites. The echo of distant laughter and classical music drifted from the main hall, a world away from my current predicament. I wiped a strand of hair from my face, likely leaving a smear of wine on my cheek in the process. A sharp edge caught my finger, and I hissed as a thin line of blood welled up. Perfect. Another stain on the uniform I'd have to explain to Mrs. Winters, the floor manager who already watched me with narrowed, suspicious eyes. The sudden silence hit me first. The distant murmur of voices and string quartet that had been floating through the corridor abruptly ceased, replaced by a heavy stillness that prickled at the back of my neck. Then came the footsteps, measured, unhurried, the distinctive click of expensive leather against marble. I didn't look up. In the service industry, you learn quickly to make yourself invisible during moments of mishap. The less attention drawn, the better. I focused on gathering the larger glass fragments into the small towel I'd been carrying, praying whoever it was would simply walk past. They didn't. The footsteps stopped precisely at the edge of the spreading wine stain. My eyes traveled upward, taking in the impeccable black leather shoes, hand-polished to a mirror shine, then the precisely tailored black trousers with a crease so sharp it could cut glass. I swallowed hard, keeping my gaze lowered. "Look at me." The voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, yet it carried an unmistakable command that sent a shiver racing down my spine. Against my better judgment, I raised my eyes. He stood perfectly still, like a predator assessing its next move. Early 30s, perhaps, with features that belonged on a Renaissance painting rather than in this sterile hotel corridor. Dark hair swept back from a face, all sharp angles and shadows. Eyes so deeply brown they appeared black in the muted hallway lighting. But it wasn't his striking appearance that made my breath catch. It was the absolute stillness about him, the controlled power evident in every line of his posture. Behind him stood 2 men in suits, their expressions blank, eyes constantly scanning the hallway. One had his hand perpetually near the inside of his jacket. The 3 of them together emanated a palpable sense of danger that made the fine hairs on my arm stand on end. I'm sorry, sir." "I'll clean this up right away," I stammered, suddenly acutely aware of my kneeling position at his feet, the wine stains on my uniform, the cut on my finger leaving tiny droplets of blood on the marble. His gaze didn't waver, dissecting me with clinical precision. "You're hurt." It wasn't a question, but an observation, delivered with such detachment that I couldn't determine if he actually cared or was merely cataloging details. Before I could respond, he turned slightly toward one of the men behind him, not fully taking his eyes off me. "Marco." The single name was enough. The broader of the 2 men stepped forward, producing a pristine handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to me. I hesitated before taking it, acutely aware that the small square of fabric probably cost more than my daily wage. "Thank you," I murmured, wrapping it around my bleeding finger. "Your name?" Again, not a question, but a demand from the man still watching me with unsettling intensity. "Eliza," I answered automatically. "Eliza Morgan." Something flickered in his expression. So brief I might have imagined it. Recognition? Interest? Impossible to tell. "Stand up, Eliza Morgan," I complied without thinking, some primitive part of my brain recognizing the futility of refusing. Even standing, I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. He was tall, his presence seeming to fill the entire corridor. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, voice still carrying that same quiet intensity that seemed far more threatening than any shout could be. I shook my head. though a creeping suspicion had begun forming. The Altezza's penthouse suites had been booked solid for the past week by a group that arrived in blacked-out SUVs, who ordered the most expensive items on the menu without glancing at prices, who made the hotel staff nervous in a way regular wealthy guests never did. I'd overheard whispers in the break room, Rossini family, Chicago territory, don't make eye contact. His lips curved slightly, not quite reaching a smile. Good. He turned to the second man, who hadn't moved a muscle. Bring her to my suite. My blood turned to ice. Sir, I'm working. I need to clean this up and return to the ballroom. That won't be necessary. His tone made it clear this wasn't a subject open for discussion. Your shift is over. As if summoned by his words, Mrs. Winters appeared at the end of the hallway, her perpetually disapproving expression, now tinged with something like fear, as she took in the scene. Me, the broken glass, the imposing man, and his two associates. Mr. Rossini, she said, her voice unnaturally high. I do apologize for this inconvenience. I'll have another server attend to your needs immediately. Rossini. The name confirmed my fears. Even I, with my limited knowledge of Chicago's underworld, recognized it. Dante Rossini. The whispers in the break room hadn't done him justice. That won't be necessary, Mrs. Winters, he replied smoothly. Miss Morgan will be assisting me with a private matter. Mrs. Winters looked between us, clearly calculating the risks. I silently pleaded with my eyes, but self-preservation won out. She gave a tight nod. Of course, Mr. Rossini. Eliza, you're relieved of your duties for tonight. And just like that, I was abandoned. My job security, my rent money, my safety, all sacrificed to appease the man everyone in the hotel clearly feared. Wait, I began desperately. I can't just... You can and you will, Rossini cut in, his voice still quiet but now edged with steel. Unless there's someone waiting for you. A boyfriend, perhaps? The question carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher, but the subtle tensing of his jaw told me my answer mattered more than it should. No, I admitted, but... Then there's no problem. He gestured to the second man, who stepped forward to take my elbow. His grip was firm but not painful, making it clear resistance would be futile. As we walked toward the private elevator reserved for the penthouse suites, I became acutely aware of every detail around me. The subtle scent of Rossini's cologne, something expensive and earthy, the silent communication between him and his men, conducted entirely through glances and the smallest of gestures, the way other hotel staff flattened themselves against walls as we passed, eyes downcast, the cool, recycled air raising goosebumps on my arms. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding that felt like the ceiling of a tomb. I stood rigid, watching the numbers climb steadily upward, trying to control my panicked breathing. 30 floors separated the main ballroom from the penthouse level. 30 floors between my normal life and whatever awaited me in Dante Rossini's suite. You're afraid, Rossini observed, breaking the tense silence. He wasn't looking at me, but at my reflection in the mirrored elevator doors. I met his reflected gaze, finding a strange courage in the indirect eye contact. Wouldn't you be? A flash of something, amusement, respect, crossed his features. Most people would be crying by now. The night is young, I replied, immediately regretting my sarcasm. To my surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. The elevator announced our arrival with another soft ding. The doors opened onto a private foyer that bore little resemblance to the rest of the hotel. Here, the modern luxury gave way to something more classically opulent, marble floors in deep green rather than white, wall sconces casting a warm glow instead of the hotel's sterile brightness. Wait here, Rossini instructed his men, as he guided me forward with a light touch at the small of my back. The contact, even through my uniform, sent an unwelcome shiver through me. We entered what appeared to be a vast living area, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Chicago's nightscape. The city lights spread out below us like fallen stars, beautiful and distant. Sit. He gestured to a leather sofa positioned before the spectacular view. I remained standing, Small defiance, perhaps, but it was all I had left. "Why am I here, Mr. Rossini?" His expression remained unreadable as he studied me, head slightly tilted. Without answering, he walked to a bar cart in the corner and poured amber liquid into 2 crystal tumblers. "You have an unusual quality, Eliza Morgan," he finally said, returning and offering me one of the glasses. "Most people can't look me in the eye for more than a few seconds. You've managed quite admirably." I didn't take the drink. "Is that why you had me brought here? Because I can maintain eye contact?" "Partly." He set my untouched glass on the coffee table and took a sip from his own. "Tell me about yourself." "There's nothing to tell," I replied flatly. "I'm a waitress with a wine-stained uniform and a missed half-shift that I desperately needed to pay rent." "And before that?" he pressed, moving to stand directly before me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain that eye contact he seemed to find so fascinating. "Before you were serving overpriced champagne to people who don't appreciate its quality?" I took a step back, unsettled by his proximity. "I was a nursing student with too much debt and not enough time." "Was?" He caught the past tense immediately. "Had to drop out, 3 semesters in." I didn't elaborate on the reasons: my mother's illness, the mounting medical bills, the second job that still wasn't enough. "Now I serve drinks and hope for good tips." He nodded slowly, as though confirming something to himself. "How long have you worked at the Altezza?" 3 weeks. "And before that?" I frowned. "Why does it matter?" "Humor me." I sighed, seeing no point in resistance. "The Palmer House, 6 months. Before that, the Drake, almost a year. Moving down in the world?" I bristled at his assessment, accurate as it was. The tips were better at the Altezza, at least until tonight. He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look years younger. It was disarming, and somehow more unsettling than his previous intensity. "You'll be compensated for your time, Eliza. More generously than those good tips you mentioned." The implication made my stomach turn. I took another step back, bumping against a side table. I don't." His smile vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine anger. "I'm not proposing to buy your body, Eliza. Contrary to what you might believe, I do have some principles." I should have felt relieved. Instead, confusion washed over me. "Then what am I doing here?" Rossini moved away, giving me space to breathe. He walked to the window, staring out at the city below. For a long moment he was silent, the only sound the clink of ice in his glass as he swirled the remaining liquid. 5 weeks ago, one of my associates had a heart attack while dining at the Palmer House, he finally said. According to witnesses, a young waitress performed CPR for 8 minutes until paramedics arrived. The doctors said those 8 minutes saved his life. My blood ran cold. I remembered that night vividly. The elderly man collapsing during dessert. The panicked screams. The training kicking in automatically as I dropped to my knees beside him. "That was you, wasn't it?" Rossini turned back to face me, his expression unreadable once more. I nodded slowly. "He was in V-fib. I recognized the symptoms from your nursing training," he finished for me. "Yes." I swallowed hard, memories flooding back. "They took him away in an ambulance. I never knew what happened after. He lived," Rossini said simply. "Carlo has been with my family for 30 years. He's recovering at his daughter's home in Florida." I felt a small measure of relief at knowing the man had survived, followed immediately by suspicion. "You've been looking for me." It wasn't a question, and Rossini didn't treat it as one. "Carlo described you. When I saw you in that hallway tonight, I recognized you immediately." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "So this is what... a thank you? A reward for saving your associate's life?" "In part." He set his empty glass down and approached me again, this time more cautiously, as though I were a wild animal that might bolt. "But also an opportunity. An opportunity," I repeated flatly. "I have an associate in need of private medical care," Rossini explained. "Someone with discretion and skill. Someone who doesn't faint at the sight of blood or panic under pressure. Someone like you, Eliza Morgan." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "You want to hire me as, what? A private nurse? For your associate?" "For my brother," he corrected quietly. And yes, that's exactly what I'm proposing. I didn't finish my degree, I pointed out. I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than most, he countered. And unlike most, you've proven you can function under extreme stress. My mind raced, calculating angles, potential traps, hidden meanings. Why not hire a real nurse or a doctor? You clearly have the money. Something dark flashed across his face. My brother's condition requires discretion that conventional medical channels cannot provide. Gunshot wounds, knife injuries, things that would have to be reported to the police. My silence must have communicated my understanding. I'm offering you $5,000 a week, Rossini continued, watching my reaction carefully. A private suite adjacent to my brother's. All expenses covered. A 3-month contract to start. The sum was staggering. More than enough to pay off my remaining student loans and my mother's medical bills. Enough to restart my life once the 3 months were over, if I survived them. And if I say no? I asked quietly. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Then you walk out of here with a generous severance for your trouble tonight, and we never speak again. It should have reassured me. Instead, it felt like a carefully crafted lie. I need to think about it, I said, knowing even as the words left my mouth that I was merely postponing the inevitable. Rossini nodded once, as though he'd expected nothing less. Of course. You have until tomorrow morning. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card, holding it out to me. My private number. Call me with your decision by 10 a.m. I took the card, our fingers brushing momentarily. His were surprisingly warm. In the meantime, he continued, one of my men will drive you home. That's not necessary, I began, but he cut me off with a raised hand. It's late, and Chicago isn't kind to women traveling alone after midnight. This isn't negotiable, Eliza. The way he said my name, with a subtle emphasis on the second syllable, sent another involuntary shiver through me. Before I could respond, he had crossed to a nearby desk and was writing something on a slip of paper. Your compensation for tonight, he said, holding it out to me. Consider it a good faith gesture. I glanced down at the check and nearly choked. $5,000. For breaking a wine glass and having an uncomfortable conversation. I can't accept this, I said, trying to hand it back. His eyes narrowed slightly. You can. You will. I opened my mouth to protest further, but something in his expression stopped me. This was a man unaccustomed to having his generosity, or anything else, rejected. Thank you, I managed instead, slipping the check into my pocket. Rossini nodded, apparently satisfied, and moved toward the door. Nico will see you home safely. I'll await your call tomorrow, Eliza. As I followed him back to the foyer where his men still waited, a question burned in my mind. Mr. Rossini? He paused, looking back at me with that same unsettling intensity. Yes? Why me? Really? I asked. There must be dozens of nursing students in Chicago who could help your brother. Why go to all this trouble to find me specifically? For a long moment he was silent, studying me with those dark, unreadable eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it. Because when Carlo described the woman who saved his life, he said she had hands that healed and eyes that saw too much. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I find I'm inclined to agree with his assessment. With that enigmatic statement hanging in the air between us, Dante Rossini opened the door and handed me off to the man called Nico, who would ensure I made it safely to my apartment in a part of town that people like Rossini probably never saw in daylight. As the elevator descended, I clutched the business card in one hand and felt the weight of the check in my pocket. By saving one man's life, I had inadvertently entangled myself with Dante Rossini. And something told me that walking away wouldn't be as simple as he'd made it sound. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my roommate asking when I'd be home. Such a normal concern from a world that suddenly felt very far away. I had until morning to decide which path to take, but as the elevator reached the ground floor, I already knew what my answer would be. Some offers you just can't refuse, even when every instinct screams that you should. The black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to my apartment building, looking absurdly out of place among the rusted sedans and budget compacts that lined my street. Nico, Rossini's silent companion, hadn't spoken more than 3 sentences during our 20-minute drive. His eyes constantly scanned the road, one hand never far from the inside of his jacket. "Wait," he said, the first word he'd uttered since we left the Altezza. He stepped out, surveyed the dimly lit street with practiced efficiency, then opened my door. "I'll walk you up." "That's really not," I began. But the look he gave me made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Another non-negotiable courtesy from Dante Rossini. My building was a 3-story walk-up, the kind with perpetually flickering hallway lights and an elevator that had been temporarily out of service since before I moved in. The stairwell smelled of old cigarettes and someone's attempt to mask them with lemon-scented cleaner. I was acutely aware of how shabby it all must look to someone accustomed to the Altezza's penthouse. Outside my door, I fumbled for my keys. "Thank you for the ride," I said, hoping to dismiss him quickly, before my roommate started asking questions I couldn't answer. Nico nodded, but remained planted in place. "Mr. Rossini instructed me to ensure you get inside safely." I sighed and unlocked the door, pushing it open to reveal my small apartment. The living room lights were on, and I could hear the soft murmur of the television. My roommate Zoe was curled up on our second-hand couch, laptop balanced on her knees, her dark hair piled in a messy bun. She looked up, her expression morphing from casual interest to wide-eyed surprise when she saw Nico looming behind me. "Eliza? Everything okay?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral while her eyes conveyed a clear, "What the actual hell?" "Everything's fine," I assured her quickly. "Just work stuff. I'll explain later." Nico, apparently satisfied that I hadn't been murdered in the 5 seconds since unlocking my door, gave a curt nod. "Mr. Rossini expects your call by 10 a.m. With that, he turned and disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps surprisingly quiet for such a large man. I closed the door, leaning against it as the reality of the evening crashed over me like a wave. The wine glass, Rossini's unexpected offer, the check still burning a hole in my pocket. "Eliza." Zoe's voice cut through my thoughts. "Why was there a human tank escorting you home, and who is Mr. Rossini?" She set her laptop aside, giving me her full attention. "And why are you home so early? And what happened to your uniform?" I looked down at my stained skirt, having almost forgotten the incident that had started this bizarre chain of events. "It's complicated. I've got time." She patted the couch beside her. "And wine. Not the fancy stuff you serve at the Altezza, but it'll do." I dropped onto the couch, kicked off my shoes, and accepted the glass she poured me from the half-empty bottle on our coffee table. The cheap Merlot was a far cry from what I'd spilled earlier, but I gulped it gratefully. "Remember that guy at the Palmer house?" I began, trying to figure out how to explain without causing alarm. "The one who had the heart attack during my shift?" Zoe nodded. "The one you saved with your nursing school superpowers?" "Sure. Turns out he works for Dante Rossini." Her eyes widened. "Wait, the Dante Rossini? As in, rumored to control half of Chicago's North Side Dante Rossini?" I stared at her. You know who he is?" "I'm a crime reporter, Eliza, or trying to be." She reached for her laptop, typing quickly. "The Rossini family has been on law enforcement's radar for decades, but they're careful, really careful." She turned the screen toward me, showing a rare photograph of Dante at some charity gala, looking even more devastatingly handsome in a tuxedo than he had in the hotel hallway. "That's him, right?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry despite the wine. "So?" "What? He tracked you down to say thank you for saving his guy?" "Something like that." I took another sip, weighing how much to reveal. Zoe was my friend, but she was also a journalist with ambitions. "He offered me a job," she repeated flatly. "What kind of job does a Mafia boss offer a waitress?" "A nursing position," I admitted. "For his brother, private care, 3 months, 5,000 a week plus accommodations." Zoe choked on her wine. 5,000 a week. She set her glass down, expression serious. "Eliza, you know what that means, right? Whatever's wrong with his brother, it's not something they can take to a hospital." I figured as much. "And you're considering it," she said. It wasn't a question. I pulled the check from my pocket, smoothing it on the coffee table between us. Zoe's eyes widened as she took in the amount. He gave you this just for talking to him? For my time, I confirmed. A good faith gesture, he called it. Zoe leaned back, studying me. You're really thinking about saying yes, aren't you? Mom's medical bills aren't going away, I said quietly. The collection agencies call daily. 3 months with Rossini would clear everything, with enough left over to maybe finish my degree. If you survive the 3 months, she pointed out, these aren't normal people, Eliza. They don't play by normal rules. I know, I sighed, rubbing my temples where a headache was forming. But what choice do I have? Keep working double shifts, hoping the tips cover rent while the interest on my loans keeps growing? Zoe was silent for a long moment. Just promise me you'll be careful, and that you'll check in regularly, and that if things get weird, weirder than they already are, you'll get out. I promise, I said, though we both knew such promises were easier made than kept. I took a long shower that night, trying to wash away the evening's events along with the wine stains. The hot water ran out too quickly, as it always did in our building, leaving me shivering as I toweled off. In the steamy bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. Pale face, dark circles under my eyes from too many consecutive shifts, hair hanging in damp strands around my shoulders. I looked exhausted, vulnerable. Is that what he saw? I wondered. Thinking of Rossini's intense gaze. Is that why he chose me? Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying every moment of my encounter with Dante Rossini, the way he'd looked at me, assessing, calculating, but with something else beneath the surface, the casual display of power in having me brought to his suite. The unexpected offer that felt too good to be true, because it almost certainly was. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. At 9:45 a.m., I dialed the number on the business card. He answered on the second ring. Rossini. It's Eliza Morgan, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. About your offer. You've decided. Not a question. Yes. I took a deep breath. I accept, with conditions. There was a pause, followed by what might have been a soft chuckle. Conditions. Interesting. Go on. First, I need details about your brother's condition before I start. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Fair enough. Second, I want weekends off. Or at least 1 day a week where I can leave and check in with my life. Another pause. Negotiable, depending on Antonio's condition. Third, I continued, finding courage in his willingness to listen. If at any point I feel uncomfortable or unsafe, I can leave. No questions asked. No. Consequences. This time the silence stretched longer. You think I would force you to stay against your will, Eliza? I think you're a man who's accustomed to getting what he wants, I replied honestly. He made a sound that might have been appreciation. Your conditions are accepted. A car will pick you up at noon. Pack for 3 months. Before I could respond, he added, And, Eliza? Thank you. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or the smartest decision possible under the circumstances. Zoe helped me pack, her face a mask of worried resignation. I still think this is crazy, she said, folding one of my few nice sweaters, but I get it. Just remember your promise. Daily texts, I recited. Weekly calls when possible, and the second things get dangerous, I'm out. She nodded, handing me the small brass knuckles she kept in her bedside drawer. Take these, and this. She added a small canister of pepper spray. Zoe, I don't think... Humor me, she insisted. It'll help me sleep at night. At precisely noon, a black SUV identical to the one from last night pulled up outside our building. This time, it was Marco who emerged, the same man who'd given me his handkerchief in the hallway. Miss Morgan? He greeted me politely, taking my single suitcase and small duffel bag. Mr. Rossini is looking forward to your arrival. I hugged Zoe tightly on the sidewalk. It's just 3 months, I whispered. I'll be fine. You'd better be, she replied fiercely. Or I'll come after Rossini myself. Reporter ethics be damned. The ride was longer than I expected. We left the familiar streets of my neighborhood, passed through downtown, and continued north along Lakeshore Drive. The gleaming skyscrapers gave way to sprawling estates set back from the road, hidden behind security gates and manicured hedges. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked Marco, who'd been silent since we departed. "Mr. Rossini's family estate in North Shore," he replied. "About 40 minutes from the city." "Of course. Not just a penthouse at the Altezza, but an actual estate in one of Chicago's wealthiest suburbs." I stared out the window as we turned onto a private road that wound through dense trees, providing strategic glimpses of Lake Michigan between the branches. An ornate iron gate blocked our path, monitored by security cameras and flanked by stone walls that extended in both directions as far as I could see. Marco rolled down his window, pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner, and spoke briefly into an intercom. The gate swung open silently. The driveway curved through meticulously landscaped grounds for nearly a quarter mile before the house came into view. House felt inadequate to describe the structure before us, a massive stone mansion that looked like it had been transplanted directly from the Italian countryside. 3 stories of pale limestone with a red tile roof, symmetrical wings extending from a central entrance, all surrounded by gardens that must have required an army of groundskeepers to maintain. "This is where Dante Rossini lives?" I asked, unable to keep the awe from my voice. "This is the family home," Marco corrected. "Mr. Rossini divides his time between here and his city residences." Residences. Plural. Of course. We pulled up to the front entrance, where stone steps led to massive double doors. Marco handed my bags to a uniformed staff member, who appeared as if summoned, then gestured for me to follow him inside. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior: soaring ceilings, marble floors, artwork that belonged in museums rather than a private residence. Everything spoke of old money and refined taste, not the gaudy display of wealth I might have expected from someone in Rossini's position. Marco led me through a series of corridors, each more elegantly appointed than the last, until we reached what appeared to be a private wing of the mansion. Here, the decor shifted subtly, still luxurious but more modern, with clean lines and a monochromatic color scheme. "Mr. Rossini asked to see you upon arrival," Marco explained, stopping before a door of dark wood. He knocked once, then opened it without waiting for a response. The room beyond was a spacious office, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves along one wall and large windows overlooking the lake on another. Dante Rossini stood by those windows, his back to the door, a phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking rapid Italian, his tone clipped and authoritative. Sensing our presence, he turned, his dark eyes finding mine immediately. He held up one finger in a universal one-moment gesture, then concluded his call with a few terse sentences. "Eliza," he said as he slipped the phone into his pocket. "Welcome." He looked different here, in his own domain, still impeccably dressed in tailored trousers and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms, but somehow more relaxed, almost approachable, if not for the undercurrent of power that still emanated from him. "Your home is beautiful," I said, for lack of anything more substantive. "It's been in my family for 3 generations," he replied, crossing the room to stand before me. "My grandfather bought the property when he first came to America, built the house to remind him of Tuscany." There was pride in his voice, but something else too, a weight of expectation perhaps, or the burden of legacy. Before I could analyze it further, he gestured to a seating area near a fireplace. "Please sit. We should discuss my brother's condition before you meet him." I perched on the edge of an armchair, while Rossini took the seat opposite me. Marco had disappeared silently, closing the door behind him. "Antonio was injured 5 weeks ago," Rossini began without preamble. "Gunshot wound to the abdomen. The bullet perforated his small intestine and nicked his liver. My nursing training kicked in automatically. He should be in a hospital, Mr. Rossini. That kind of injury." "He was," he cut me off. "For 3 weeks. The immediate damage has been repaired surgically. What he needs now is recovery care, physical therapy, and monitoring for complications." "And you can't hire a regular home health nurse because—" His jaw tightened. "Because the shooting was the culmination of a series of events that have made my family visible to certain law enforcement agencies. Antonio's hospital stay was already a risk. Having strangers in and out of our home would be unwise. Translation: the police are watching, and whatever happened to Antonio was probably illegal. I see, I said carefully. What exactly would my responsibilities entail? Changing surgical dressings, monitoring his condition, administering prescribed medications, assisting with physical therapy exercises, basically, ensuring he recovers fully and doesn't develop complications. It sounded straightforward enough, standard post-operative care that I'd been trained for, even if I hadn't completed my degree. And the reason for the 3-month time frame? Antonio's doctor estimates full recovery will take approximately 12 weeks, Rossini explained. After that, he should be able to manage with minimal assistance. I nodded slowly, processing this information. It was both better and worse than I'd feared. No active gunshot wounds to treat, but clear confirmation that I was entering a dangerous world where violence was commonplace enough to have contingency plans. One last question, I said, meeting his gaze directly. Why me, really? You could have found a fully qualified nurse willing to be discreet for the money you're offering. Rossini studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he rose and walked to his desk, returning with a folder that he handed to me. Inside were photographs, surveillance images of me leaving my apartment building, entering the Altezza Hotel, sitting in a coffee shop with Zoe. There were copies of my nursing school transcripts, my mother's medical records, even a list of my outstanding student loans and their amounts. Cold dread washed over me. You've been investigating me. I investigate everyone who comes into my orbit, he replied unapologetically, especially someone I'm trusting with my brother's care. I flipped through the pages, increasingly disturbed by the thoroughness of the dossier. He knew everything about me, where I'd lived, where I'd worked, my financial situation, even my mother's cancer diagnosis and treatment history. I couldn't find the words. Necessary, he finished for me. In my position, I can't afford to trust blindly. I closed the folder, pushing it back toward him. And what did your investigation tell you? That you're intelligent, hardworking, and desperate enough to accept my offer despite your misgivings, he said bluntly. That you have a moral compass that led you to save Carlo's life without hesitation. That you're capable under pressure, and perhaps most importantly, that you have no connections to any of my enemies or to law enforcement. The clinical assessment made me sound like a particularly suitable appliance he was considering purchasing. I should have been offended, but his honesty was oddly refreshing after a lifetime of people's hidden agendas. Well, I said finally, at least we understand each other. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Do we? Before I could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. Marco appeared again, his expression grave. Mr. Rossini, Antonio is asking for you. His fever has returned. Rossini was on his feet instantly, all trace of our almost casual conversation vanishing. Show Miss Morgan to her quarters, then bring her to Antonio's room, he instructed, already striding toward the door. He paused briefly, looking back at me. Your job begins now, it seems. And just like that, I was swept into the Rossini family drama, my suitcases still unpacked, my doubts still unresolved. As Marco led me through the labyrinthine corridors to what would be my home for the next 3 months, I tried to ignore the voice in my head, warning me that I'd just crossed a threshold from which there might be no easy return. My room, quarters, seemed too cold a word for the luxurious suite Marco showed me into, was bigger than my entire apartment. A sitting area with plush furniture, a bedroom with a king-sized 4-poster bed, a marble bathroom that made the Altezza's facilities look modest, and even a small balcony overlooking the gardens. Mr. Rossini thought you would be most comfortable here, Marco explained. It connects directly to Antonio's suite through that door. He indicated a door in the far wall. For ease of access during your duties, he gave me exactly 2 minutes to wash my hands and compose myself before escorting me to meet my patient. As we approached another door at the end of the hallway, I squared my shoulders and took a deep breath. Whatever awaited me on the other side, I was now committed to seeing it through. For better or worse, I had entered Dante Rossini's world, and I suspected leaving it wouldn't be nearly as simple as he'd promised. Antonio Rossini's suite made mine look modest by comparison. Twice the size, with a wall of windows overlooking Lake Michigan, it had been converted into something between a luxury apartment and a hospital room. Medical equipment stood discreetly alongside antique furniture, creating an incongruous blend of clinical necessity and opulence. Dante stood by the massive bed where a figure lay beneath fine sheets. Even from the doorway, I could see the resemblance between the brothers. The same dark hair, the same strong profile, but where Dante exuded controlled power, Antonio looked diminished, his features sharpened by pain and fever. "Antonio," Dante said, his voice gentler than I'd heard it before. "This is Eliza Morgan, the nurse I told you about." Antonio's eyes fluttered open, the same deep brown as his brother's, but clouded with discomfort. He regarded me with a mixture of suspicion and relief. "You don't look like a nurse," he said, his voice raspy. I approached the bed, automatically assessing his condition with practiced eyes. Pale skin with an unhealthy sheen of sweat. Rapid, shallow breathing, the slight grimace that suggested he was trying to hide significant pain. "I get that a lot," I replied, keeping my tone professional but warm. "Mr. Rossini, I need to check your temperature and vital signs. Is that all right?" He gave a weak nod, then glanced at his brother. "Dante, give us some privacy." A flash of something, concern, annoyance, crossed Dante's face, but he nodded. "I'll be in my office if you need anything." The statement seemed addressed to both of us, but his eyes lingered on me, carrying an unspoken warning. Don't fail at this. Once Dante had left, closing the door behind him, I moved efficiently around the room, locating the medical supplies I would need. A digital thermometer on the bedside table. A blood pressure cuff and stethoscope arranged neatly on a nearby cart. Everything state-of-the-art and pristine. 102.8, I read from the thermometer after checking Antonio's temperature. "How long have you had the fever?" "It comes and goes," he said, watching me warily as I wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm. "Worse since last night." I frowned, noting the elevated blood pressure and rapid pulse. "I need to check your surgical site. When was the last time your dressing was changed?" "This morning. One of Dante's men does it. Marco. He was a medic in the army." That explained Marco's clinical efficiency. I gently pulled back the covers and lifted Antonio's silk pajama top to reveal a large bandage on his abdomen. Carefully peeling back the edge, I immediately noticed the angry redness around the healing incision, the slight but unmistakable swelling. "This is infected," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the concern rising within me. "Has your doctor seen this?" Antonio's laugh was bitter. "My doctor comes when Dante calls him. And Dante hasn't called him because I told him I was fine." I raised an eyebrow. "Well, you're not fine. You need antibiotics, stronger ones than whatever you're currently taking, by the look of this." I searched through the medications arranged on a nearby table, quickly identifying the prescribed antibiotics. The dosage was inadequate for the infection I was seeing. "I need to speak with your brother," I said, replacing the bandage. "And you need to start on stronger antibiotics immediately. He'll be impossible to live with if he thinks he was right," Antonio muttered. Despite his obvious discomfort, there was something boyish about his complaint, reminding me that despite being involved in his family's dangerous business, he was still a younger brother, chafing under an older sibling's authority. "I'll handle Dante," I assured him, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice. "You focus on getting better." I found Dante exactly where he said he'd be, in his office, phone pressed to his ear again. He looked up when I entered, quickly concluding his call. "How is he?" No preamble, just direct concern. "The surgical site is infected," I said, matching his directness. "He needs stronger antibiotics, and he should probably be seen by a doctor." Dante's expression tightened. "How serious?" "Not life-threatening yet, but it could become so if left untreated. The infection could spread to his bloodstream and cause sepsis." He nodded once, already reaching for his phone. "I'll call Dr. Kiernan. Your brother mentioned that you have someone who changes his dressings. Marco?" "Yes, he has some medical training." "I'd like to handle all of Antonio's care myself from now on," I said firmly, "including wound care. Consistency is important." Dante studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. You're in charge of his medical care now. Whatever you need, just ask." I need a complete list of his medications, copies of his surgical reports, and any post-discharge instructions, I said, and a direct line to this Dr. Kiernan. If Dante was surprised by my assertiveness, he didn't show it. Instead, he opened a drawer and withdrew a thick folder. Everything is in here. Dr. Kiernan will be here within the hour. Is there anything else my brother needs immediately? I thought for a moment. Fever reducers. Something light to eat when he feels up to it. And he should be drinking more fluids than he probably has been. I'll have the kitchen prepare something suitable, Dante said, and Marco will show you where everything else is kept. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Kiernan arrived, a silver-haired man with a perpetually worried expression, who seemed both competent and understandably nervous about treating a Rossini. He confirmed my assessment, prescribed stronger antibiotics, and departed as quickly as he'd arrived, leaving me with updated care instructions. By evening, I'd established a medication schedule, changed Antonio's dressings properly, and coaxed him into drinking several glasses of water and eating some broth. His fever had dropped slightly, though he still looked uncomfortable. "You're good at this," he observed as I adjusted his pillows. "Better than Marco." I smiled. "I should hope so. I spent 3 years training for it." "Dante said you dropped out of nursing school." "I did. Family circumstances." Antonio nodded, not pressing for details. "Well, his loss is our gain, I guess. Our gain. Already being claimed by the Rossini family after less than a day." The thought should have disturbed me more than it did. A knock at the door interrupted us. Dante entered, his gaze immediately going to his brother, assessing his condition with obvious concern before turning to me. "How is he?" "Better," I answered. "The fever's down slightly, and he's managed to eat something." Relief softened Dante's features momentarily. "Good. You should eat something too. I've had dinner prepared." I glanced at my watch, surprised to find it was already past 8 p.m. I'd been so focused on Antonio that I'd lost track of time entirely. "I can have something brought up," I said, reluctant to leave my patient. "You've been working for hours without a break," Dante pointed out. "Antonio will be fine for the time it takes you to have a proper meal." Antonio waved a hand weakly. "Go. I'm just going to sleep anyway. The pain meds are kicking in." I hesitated, then nodded. "I'll check on you when I get back. The call button is right here if you need anything." Dante led me through the mansion's corridors to a smaller, more intimate dining room than I would have expected. No grand formal space with a table for 20, but a comfortable room with a table set for 2, lit by candles and overlooking the gardens. "I thought you might prefer something quieter after your first day," Dante explained, pulling out a chair for me. I sat, suddenly acutely aware that I was still wearing the clothes I'd arrived in, simple jeans and a sweater that had seemed perfectly adequate that morning, but now felt hopelessly casual amid such elegance. Dante took the seat opposite me, seemingly unbothered by my appearance. A server appeared silently, pouring wine and presenting the first course. A delicate salad with ingredients I couldn't even identify. "Thank you for today," Dante said after the server had withdrawn. "Dr. Kiernan was impressed with your assessment." I took a sip of the wine, rich and complex in a way the cheap bottles Zoe and I shared could never be. "I was doing my job, which you've had for less than 12 hours, he pointed out. "Most people would still be adjusting to their surroundings." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Your brother needed care. The surroundings are irrelevant to that." A small smile touched Dante's lips. "You're a very direct person, Eliza Morgan. I don't see the point in being otherwise." "A rare quality," he murmured, studying me with that same intense gaze from the hotel corridor. "Most people who enter my orbit are either obsequious to the point of uselessness or paralyzed by fear. I can't afford to be either if I'm going to help your brother," I replied simply. The first course was replaced by the second, perfectly cooked fish with a sauce I couldn't name, but that tasted like it had been prepared by angels. "Tell me about your family," Dante said suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Why?" "Because I'm curious about the woman who's caring for my brother," he replied. "Is that so strange?" "You already know about my family," I pointed out. Your investigation was quite thorough. He inclined his head, acknowledging the point. I know the facts. Dates, places, medical records. I don't know how you feel about them. I set down my fork, considering my response carefully. My mother has been sick for a long time. Stage 4 breast cancer. It's why I dropped out of nursing school. To work more hours, to help with her care. I took another sip of wine, finding it easier to talk while looking at the glass rather than at him. My father left when I was 12. Haven't heard from him since. I'm sorry about your mother, Dante said. And to my surprise, he sounded sincere. The treatments have stopped working, I continued. Not sure why I was telling him this, but unable to stop now that I'd started. The doctors give her 6 months, maybe less. The medical bills. I trailed off, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. Is she in a good facility? I nodded. The best we could afford, which isn't saying much. Dante was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. Would you like her transferred to a private care center? I know several excellent ones. The offer startled me. Why would you do that? His expression was unreadable. Consider it part of your compensation package. I don't need charity, Mr. Rossini. Dante, he corrected. And it isn't charity. It's an employee benefit. I wanted to refuse on principle, but my mother's face flashed in my mind, growing thinner by the week, her smile weaker each time I visited. How could I deny her better care out of pride? I'll think about it, I said finally. Dante nodded, accepting this compromise. The offer stands whenever you're ready. The remainder of the meal passed in surprisingly comfortable conversation. Dante asked about my nursing training, listening with genuine interest as I explained what had drawn me to healthcare. In turn, I found myself curious about him, not the Mafia boss from whispered break room conversations, but the man sitting across from me who clearly cared deeply about his brother. Have you always lived here? I asked as dessert was served. A delicate confection of chocolate and berries. I grew up in this house, Dante replied. Left for college, then returned when my father became ill. To take over the family business, I said carefully. A shadow crossed his face. Yes. Was that always the plan? He was quiet for a long moment. My father expected it. Antonio was meant for other things. University, a legitimate career. I was the eldest son. There was a weight of resignation in his voice that made me wonder, fleetingly, what path he might have chosen if given the freedom to do so. And now Antonio is involved anyway, I observed. Dante's expression hardened. Not by my choice. He insisted on joining the business after our father died. I wanted him to stay away, to have the normal life our father intended for him. Is that why you're so protective of him? He's my brother, Dante said simply, as though that explained everything. Perhaps in his world it did. After dinner, Dante walked me back to Antonio's room. My patient was sleeping soundly, his fever reduced enough that his face looked relaxed in slumber. You should get some rest, Dante said softly, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne. That same earthy, expensive scent from the hotel. It's been a long day. I nodded, suddenly aware of my own exhaustion. I'll check on him once more before I sleep. You'll have your phone with you, in case he needs you during the night? Of course. Dante hesitated, then reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers brushing my skin so lightly I might have imagined it. Thank you, Eliza, truly. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with my cheek tingling from his touch and my mind racing with confusion. In my luxurious suite, I finally allowed myself to process the day's events. In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from a struggling waitress to living in a mansion, caring for a mafia prince, and dining by candlelight with one of Chicago's most dangerous men, who was offering to move my mother to a better care facility and touching my face with inexplicable gentleness. I texted Zoe as promised. Safe. Long day. Patient doing okay. Accommodations ridiculous. We'll call tomorrow. Her response was immediate. Details. Is the boss as scary as they say? Are you locked in? Do you need extraction? I smiled despite my exhaustion. Not locked in. Boss is complicated. No extraction needed. Yet. I added the yet to make her laugh. But as I sank into the most comfortable bed I'd ever encountered, I wondered if it might prove prophetic. There was more happening here than a simple employment arrangement. The way Dante looked at me sometimes, with an intensity that went beyond professional assessment. The careful distance he maintained, except for that one brief touch. I'd entered the Rossini world expecting danger from bullets and criminal activities. I hadn't considered that the greatest risk might come from Dante Rossini himself, not through violence, but through whatever complicated emotion seemed to be simmering beneath his controlled exterior. The next week fell into a rhythm. Antonio's infection responded to the stronger antibiotics, and his recovery began progressing more normally. I spent most of my days in his suite, changing dressings, administering medications, and helping with the gentle exercises Dr. Kiernan had prescribed to prevent muscle atrophy. To my surprise, I found I actually liked Antonio. Beneath the tough exterior was a thoughtful young man who read voraciously. His bedside table was always stacked with books ranging from classical literature to modern thrillers, and who possessed a wry sense of humor even when in pain. "So," he said one afternoon as I checked his incision, which was finally showing signs of proper healing, "how did my brother convince you to take this job? He can be very persuasive when he wants something." I kept my expression neutral. "He made a generous offer. I needed the money." Antonio studied me with eyes too perceptive for comfort. "That's part of it. But Dante could have hired a dozen qualified nurses willing to be discreet. He wanted you specifically." I secured the fresh bandage, avoiding his gaze. "Because I helped Carlo, maybe." Antonio didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe because you're exactly his type." My head snapped up. We're not, it's not like that." Antonio's smile was knowing. "If you say so." I changed the subject quickly, uncomfortable with the implication. "Dr. Kiernan will be pleased with your progress. The infection is clearing nicely." But Antonio's words lingered in my mind, especially because I'd seen relatively little of Dante since that first dinner. He checked in on his brother daily, of course, but our interactions had been brief and professional. Sometimes I felt his eyes on me as I worked, but whenever I looked up, his expression was unreadable. It was almost a relief when, on my 8th day at the Rossini estate, Dante appeared in Antonio's doorway while I was administering the evening medications. "Eliza, may I speak with you when you're finished here?" I nodded, trying to ignore the knowing look Antonio gave me. "Of course. 10 minutes?" Dante inclined his head and withdrew, leaving me to complete my tasks under Antonio's amused scrutiny. "Not like that, huh?" he murmured. I rolled my eyes, refusing to engage. "Take these," I said, handing him his pills. "I'll be back to check on you before bed." Dante was waiting in the corridor, leaning against the wall with casual elegance. "Walk with me," he suggested, gesturing toward the gardens. The evening was mild, the lake breeze carrying the scent of flowers from the meticulously maintained beds that surrounded the mansion. We walked in silence for several minutes, following a stone path that wound between sculpted hedges and ornamental trees. "Antonio is improving," Dante finally said, "thanks to your care." "The antibiotics did most of the work," I replied modestly. "But yes, he's doing much better." Dante nodded, seeming pleased. "I've been meaning to ask, have you considered my offer regarding your mother?" I had, in fact, thought about little else during quiet moments. "It's very generous," I said carefully. "But you haven't decided." I stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "Why are you doing this? The job, the salary, now offering to move my mother. It's excessive for just nursing care." Dante studied me, his dark eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "Perhaps I believe in being generous to those who help my family." "Perhaps," I echoed, not believing it for a second. "Or perhaps there's something you're not telling me." A smile touched his lips. "You're very direct, Eliza Morgan." "So you've said before," he resumed walking, and I fell into step beside him. "The truth is, I find myself intrigued by you." My heart rate picked up despite my best efforts to remain calm. "Intrigued. You saved Carlo without hesitation or expectation of reward. You speak to me without fear or false deference. You care for Antonio with genuine compassion rather than just professional obligation." He glanced at me. "These are rare qualities in my world." "I'm just doing my job," I said, echoing my words from that first dinner. "No. Dante shook his head slightly. You're doing far more than that. You're bringing humanity into a situation where it's often in short supply. And I didn't know how to respond to that. We walked in silence until reaching a stone bench overlooking the lake, where Dante gestured for me to sit. There's something else, he said, remaining standing. I'm hosting a gathering here this weekend. Business associates, some family friends. Nothing too elaborate. I nodded, wondering why he was telling me this. Antonio is well enough now that your constant presence isn't required. Dante continued. You're welcome to join the gathering if you wish. Or you could take the evening off, perhaps visit your mother or your roommate. It was the first reference to the time-off condition I'd requested before accepting the position. I hadn't expected him to honor it so soon. I'd like to visit my mother, I said without hesitation, if you're sure Antonio will be all right. I'll have Marco check on him periodically, Dante assured me. A car will be available to take you wherever you need to go and bring you back when you're ready. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for the unexpected consideration. Dante turned to face the lake, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. There's something about you, Eliza, he said, his voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear him. Something that makes me want to be better than what I am. Before I could process that startling confession, he turned back to me, his expression once again composed. We should return to the house. It's getting cold. As we walked back in silence, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Dante Rossini, feared Mafia boss, was offering me time off, transportation to visit my mother, and confessing that I somehow inspired him to be better. It was disorienting, especially coupled with Antonio's earlier insinuations. I told myself it was nothing, that Dante was simply a complex man capable of both ruthless business dealings and unexpected kindness, that his interest in me was merely the novelty of having someone in his household who treated him like a person rather than a threat or an opportunity. But as we reached the house and he held the door open for me, his hand briefly touching the small of my back as I passed, I couldn't ignore the warmth that spread through me at the contact. Nor could I deny the strange sense of connection forming between us, tentative and undefined, but undeniably present. Good night, Eliza, he said softly, as we reached the corridor leading to Antonio's wing. Good night, Dante, I replied, using his first name deliberately, testing how it felt on my tongue. His eyes darkened at the sound, and for a breathless moment, I thought he might say or do something more. Instead, he simply nodded and turned away, leaving me to wonder if I'd imagined the tension crackling between us. As I checked on Antonio one last time before retiring to my suite, I reminded myself of Zoe's warnings and my own misgivings. Getting emotionally involved with Dante Rossini would be beyond foolish. It would be potentially dangerous. He lived in a world of violence and power struggles that I could scarcely comprehend. Yet as I lay awake that night, staring at the ornate ceiling of my borrowed bedroom, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me in the garden, or the gentle pressure of his hand against my back, or the vulnerability in his voice when he'd made that unexpected confession. 3 months suddenly seemed both too long and not nearly enough time to spend in the orbit of such a complicated man. And despite all my rational objections, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow, when I would inevitably see him again. Saturday morning arrived with perfect clarity and sunshine, as though the weather itself had been arranged to Dante's specifications. I packed a small overnight bag, planning to spend the day with my mother and the evening with Zoe, before returning to the estate on Sunday. Antonio seemed genuinely pleased when I told him about my plans. Good, he said, setting aside the book he'd been reading. You deserve a break from babysitting me. It's hardly babysitting, I protested, checking his incision one last time before leaving. And Marco will be checking on you throughout the day. Antonio made a dismissive gesture. Marco's bedside manner makes drill sergeants seem cuddly, but I'll survive until tomorrow. He gave me a pointed look. Besides, it'll give Dante something to focus on besides this gathering he's dreading. Dreading? I raised an eyebrow. It was my understanding he organized it. Organized, yes. Wants to host? No. Antonio adjusted his position, wincing slightly. These business gatherings are necessary evils, especially now with things being complicated. I'd gathered from snippets of overheard conversations and Antonio's occasional comments that the Rossini family was navigating some sort of territorial dispute with a rival organization. Antonio's shooting had apparently been part of this conflict, though no one had shared the specifics with me. For my own protection, I assumed. "Well, I'm sure it will be fine," I said, repacking my medical bag. "Try to rest while I'm gone, and don't let Marco bully you into overdoing the exercises." Antonio grinned. "Yes, Nurse Morgan." I was just closing my overnight bag when a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Dante standing there, impeccably dressed as always, but with an unusual tension around his eyes. "Your car is ready," he said, then gestured to a small box in his hand. "But first, I have something for you." I stepped back to let him enter, curious despite myself. "You didn't need to. I wanted to," he interrupted, handing me the box. "Open it." Inside was a sleek smartphone, newer and more expensive than anything I could have afforded. "I don't understand." "It's secure," Dante explained. "Encrypted. My number and Marco's are programmed in, along with a direct line to Dr. Kiernan." His expression grew serious. "If you need anything at all, while you're away, you call me, immediately." I turned the phone over in my hands, touched by the gesture even as I recognized the subtle way he was maintaining connection and control. "Even during my time off, thank you," I said, "though I hope I won't need to use it, as do I." He hesitated, then added, "I've also taken the liberty of arranging something at your mother's care facility. Nothing intrusive, just an improvement in her comfort." My head snapped up. "What did you do?" "Nothing that would draw attention," he assured me. "A private room, some additional care hours, better food options." He held up a hand when I started to protest. "No paperwork in your name or mine. Nothing traceable or suspicious." I wasn't sure whether to be grateful or alarmed by his intervention. "You didn't need to do that. I know." His eyes held mine. "But your mother's comfort matters to you, and you matter to—" He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "Your well-being matters to Antonio's recovery." I didn't believe that explanation for a second, but I nodded, accepting the gift for what it was. "Thank you." Dante glanced at his watch. "The driver will take you wherever you need to go today and bring you back tomorrow whenever you're ready. His name is Vincent. He's reliable and discreet." The emphasis on discreet wasn't lost on me. Whatever Dante had arranged for my mother, he wanted it kept quiet, not just from authorities, but perhaps from his own associates as well. "I'll see you tomorrow then," I said, slipping the new phone into my purse. He nodded, but made no move to leave. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the tiny flecks of gold in his dark irises. "Eliza." The way he said my name made my breath catch. "Yes?" "Be careful." His voice was low, intense. "The world outside these walls is less secure than I would like it to be at the moment." Before I could ask what he meant, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, that same gesture from our first evening. But this time his fingers lingered against my cheek for a heartbeat longer. Then he was gone, leaving me with flushed cheeks and a racing pulse. Vincent was waiting by a black sedan at the front entrance, not one of the imposing SUVs I'd come to associate with Rossini's operation, but something more understated while still unmistakably expensive. He was older than Marco and Nico, with salt and pepper hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had seen too much in his lifetime. "Miss Morgan," he greeted me, opening the rear door. "Where would you like to go first?" "Lakeside Care Center in Evanston," I replied, settling into the plush leather seat. The drive was peaceful, Vincent maintaining a professional silence that I appreciated as I watched the landscape transition from North Shore opulence to more modest suburbs. When we arrived at the care center, he pulled up to the entrance and turned to me. "I'll wait here, Miss Morgan. Take as much time as you need." The receptionist greeted me by name as I entered, her smile warmer than I remembered from previous visits. "Your mother has been moved to the East Wing," she informed me cheerfully. "Room 214. It's a lovely space, one of our premium singles." I thanked her, navigating the familiar corridors with growing curiosity about exactly what Dante had arranged. The answer became apparent as soon as I reached room 214. The standard issue shared room my mother had occupied for the past year had been replaced by a spacious private suite with large windows overlooking a garden, new furniture, and a level of comfort that would have been far beyond our means. My mother was sitting in a comfortable armchair by the window, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. She brightened when she saw me. "Eliza, there you are. Did you know about all this?" She gestured around the room with a frail hand. "They moved me yesterday. Said there was an anonymous benefactor who'd arranged it. I thought perhaps you—" "A friend helped arrange it," I said carefully, hugging her and noting with concern how thin she felt in my arms. "How are you feeling?" "Better, actually. They've adjusted my pain medication, and it's making a world of difference." She studied my face with the penetrating gaze that illness hadn't diminished. "You look different." "Different how?" "I'm not sure. More rested, perhaps? Your new job must be treating you well." I smiled, settling into the chair beside hers. "It's interesting. Challenging in a good way." "Tell me everything," she insisted, and I spent the next hour sharing carefully edited versions of my time at the Rossini estate, omitting any mention of Mafia connections or gunshot wounds, instead focusing on the nursing aspects and the beautiful grounds. "And your employer?" she asked shrewdly. "What's he like?" I felt a flush creeping up my neck. "He's complex. Intimidating at first, but surprisingly considerate in his way." She smiled knowingly. "Handsome, too, I'm guessing from that blush." "Mom," I protested, but couldn't deny it. "Yes, he's attractive. But it's not like that." "If you say so, dear." Her tone made it clear she didn't believe me for a second. We spent the rest of the day together, sharing lunch in her new room. The food quality had indeed improved dramatically. And taking a slow walk in the garden when she felt strong enough. I noticed other small changes too. More attentive staff, a new television, fresh flowers on her bedside table. Dante had been thorough in his improvements. When it was time to leave, I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears as I always did. Each goodbye carried the weight of knowing our time together was limited and shrinking rapidly. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart." She cupped my face in her cool hands. "And Eliza, whoever this friend is who arranged all this, they clearly care about you a great deal. Don't be afraid of that." I swallowed hard. "It's complicated. Life usually is," she smiled. "That doesn't mean it's not worth embracing." Vincent drove me to my apartment next, maintaining that same respectful silence that allowed me to process my swirling emotions. When we arrived, he handed me a card with his number. "Call when you're ready to return tomorrow, Miss Morgan. Day or night." Zoe nearly tackled me when I walked through the door, pulling me into a fierce hug before holding me at arm's length to inspect me. "Well, you're not bruised, kidnapped, or brainwashed," she declared. "That's a good start." I laughed, dropping my overnight bag on the couch. "I told you I was fine." "You said the boss was complicated," she countered. "Coming from you, that could mean anything from slightly moody to psychopath with good table manners." I rolled my eyes but gave her the update she was clearly desperate for, sharing more details with her than I had with my mother, but still omitting anything that might violate the confidentiality I'd tacitly agreed to by accepting Dante's offer. "So, let me get this straight," Zoe said when I'd finished, opening a bottle of wine and pouring us each a glass. "You're living in a mansion, caring for a recovering Mafia prince, and the big bad boss is giving you meaningful looks, touching your hair, and upgrading your mom's care without being asked." Put that way, it sounded ridiculous. "It's not. It's exactly like that," she interrupted. "Eliza, he's interested in you. Like, romantically interested." I took a large sip of wine. "That would be insane." "Why? You're gorgeous, smart, and you literally saved his guy's life. Plus, you're not afraid of him, which I'm guessing is a novelty in his world. He's a Mafia boss, Zoe. His brother was shot. People in his orbit end up dead or in prison." "I'm not saying marry the guy," she clarified. "Just be aware of what's happening. Knowledge is power, especially in a situation like this." I couldn't argue with that logic. And if I was honest with myself, the possibility that Dante's interest might be more than professional both terrified and thrilled me in ways I wasn't ready to examine too closely. We spent the evening catching up, ordering takeout, and watching bad reality TV like we used to before my life took its bizarre turn. It felt normal, comfortable, and yet somehow less vibrant than the tension-filled days at the Rossini estate. I tried to ignore what that might mean about my changing perspective. As Zoe was heading to bed, she paused in the hallway. "Oh, I meant to tell you, there was a guy asking about you at Murphy's the other night." Murphy's was the bar near our apartment where we occasionally went for cheap drinks. "What guy?" She shrugged. "Never seen him before. Older guy, maybe 50s. Asked the bartender if he knew Eliza Morgan. Said he was an old friend of your dad's looking to reconnect." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing." "I overheard him asking Mike. Mike said he didn't know you." She frowned at my expression. "Is it a problem?" "Probably nothing," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just weird timing." But as I settled into my old bed, so much less comfortable than the one I'd been sleeping in for the past week, I couldn't shake a sense of unease. My father had been out of my life for 15 years, and I'd never known any of his friends. And the timing, just as I'd entered Dante Rossini's orbit, felt too coincidental to ignore. I pulled out the secure phone Dante had given me, staring at it for a long moment before setting it aside. It was nothing, probably. Just a coincidence. Not worth bothering Dante about during his business gathering. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by strange dreams where faceless men followed me through hospital corridors while Dante watched from a distance, unable or unwilling to help. I woke to the sound of my regular phone buzzing with a text from Zoe. Gone for morning shift at the paper. Coffee and pot. Dinner later before you go back to Mafia Mansion? I smiled at her nickname for the estate and texted back an affirmative, then stretched and considered my plans for the day. I wanted to visit my mother again, maybe bring her some books from the small collection I kept in my bedroom. As I moved around the apartment, gathering things for a shower, I became aware of a strange silence outside. Sunday mornings in our neighborhood were usually punctuated by the sounds of children playing in the courtyard, cars starting, people heading to brunches or churches. Today, nothing. I peered through the blinds to the street below and froze. Vincent's black sedan was still parked across the street, but beside it now was an SUV I recognized as belonging to the Rossini security detail. Two men I didn't know stood beside it, scanning the street with unmistakable vigilance. My phone, my regular one, buzzed again. Unknown number. "Don't leave your apartment. Dante is sending more security. Stay away from windows." My heart began to pound. I reached for the secure phone Dante had given me, dialing his number with shaking fingers. He answered immediately. "Eliza." "What's happening?" I demanded, moving away from the window as instructed. "A complication." His voice was taut with controlled tension. "Nothing for you to worry about. Just stay inside until my men come to get you." "Dante," I said firmly, "tell me what's going on." There was a pause, then a short sigh. "One of our rivals has taken an interest in my recent activities, including my hiring of a private nurse." His voice hardened. "Someone's been asking questions about you." The man at Murphy's. Older man, 50s? Claiming to be a friend of my father's? Dante's silence was answer enough. "He was at a bar near my apartment, asking about me," I explained. "Zoe mentioned it last night, but I didn't think—" "Why didn't you call me immediately?" The question wasn't accusatory, but I could hear the tension behind it. "I didn't want to bother you during your business gathering," I admitted. It seemed like it could be a coincidence. In my world, Eliza, there are no coincidences. His voice softened slightly. "Marco is on his way with additional men. They'll bring you directly back to the estate. Pack only what you need. We can arrange for the rest of your things later." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You think I'm in danger? I think it's best not to take unnecessary risks. What about Zoe? If someone's watching me, they've seen her too." Another pause. "Where is she now?" "At work. The Tribune building." "I'll have someone keep an eye on her," Dante promised. "But the interest seems to be specifically in you and your connection to me." "And my mother?" The thought sent a spike of panic through me. "Already handled," he assured me. "I increased security at her facility this morning. She's safe." The fact that he'd anticipated my concerns should have been comforting. Instead, It only emphasized how real the threat must be for him to have taken such precautions. "How long until Marco gets here?" I asked, already moving to my bedroom to pack. 20 minutes, traffic permitting." I could hear muffled voices on his end of the call, suggesting he was coordinating multiple elements simultaneously. "Eliza, listen carefully. Until Marco arrives, do not open your door for anyone. Stay away from windows. If you hear anything suspicious, call me immediately." "I will." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I'm sorry to cut your time away short." "Ugh, it's not your fault," I replied automatically, though part of me wondered if that was entirely true. If I hadn't accepted his offer, would I now be facing unknown threats from rival crime families? "We'll talk more when you're safely back," he said, and I could hear the barely restrained emotion in his voice. Anger, concern, perhaps something more. "Be careful, Eliza." The call ended, and I moved quickly, throwing essential items into my overnight bag. As I reached for my hairbrush on the bathroom counter, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside our apartment. I froze, straining to listen. Another creak, closer to our door. Then silence. Heart pounding, I slipped back to the bedroom, grabbing the secure phone and retreating to the bathroom, the only room without windows. I sent a quick text to Dante. "Someone outside apartment door." His response was immediate. "Marco 5 minutes away. Hide, stay silent." I locked the bathroom door, then slid into the narrow space between the shower and the wall, making myself as small as possible. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one marked by my thundering heartbeat. Then came the sound I'd been dreading. The subtle scrape of metal against metal at our front door. Someone was picking the lock. I covered my mouth to stifle a gasp, pressing myself harder against the wall. The front door opened with a soft click, followed by the barely audible sound of footsteps entering the apartment. "Check the bedrooms," a man's voice murmured. "She should be alone." Footsteps split off in different directions. At least 2 people, maybe more. I heard them moving through the apartment, opening doors, checking closets. "Bathroom's locked," someone called from directly outside my hiding place. The handle rattled. "Morgan, we know you're in there. We just want to talk." I remained silent, clutching the phone and praying that Marco would arrive in time. "Open the door, or we break it down." The voice continued, any pretense at friendliness gone. 3 seconds. 1, 2. The sudden crash from the front of the apartment was followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Gunshots, 2, in rapid succession. Then more shouting, this time in Italian. "Eliza," Marco's voice, calling from what sounded like the living room. "Eliza, it's Marco. You can come out now." I stayed frozen in place, unwilling to trust without verification. I texted Dante. "Marco here?" Gunshots. The reply came instantly. "It's him. You're safe. Go with him." Slowly, I emerged from my hiding place and unlocked the bathroom door. The scene in our apartment was chaotic. Furniture overturned, a lamp shattered on the floor, and 3 of Dante's men, including Marco, standing over 2 bound figures lying face down on our living room rug. Marco approached me quickly, his normally impassive face showing rare concern. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to take my eyes off the men on the floor. "Who are they?" "Calabresi family," Marco said grimly. "We need to move. Now." He ushered me out of the apartment, past 2 more of Dante's men standing guard in the hallway, and into the waiting SUV. Vincent's sedan was gone, replaced by 2 more SUVs that would escort us back to the estate. As we pulled away, I looked back at my apartment building, the place that had been my home for the past 2 years, now a crime scene I might never see again. The reality of my situation crashed over me in waves. I had been targeted by a rival crime family. There had been gunshots in my living room. Men had been sent to abduct me, all because of my connection to Dante Rossini. "Mr. Rossini is waiting for you," Marco said, as we sped through the city, 2 cars ahead of us, and 1 behind, creating a protective convoy. He wanted to come himself, but under the circumstances, I nodded numbly, understanding that Dante's presence would have escalated an already dangerous situation. "Zoe, my roommate, being watched by our people," Marco assured me. "She'll be protected." Does she know what happened? Marco's hesitation told me everything. Mr. Rossini thought it best if she wasn't alarmed unnecessarily. She'll be told there was a break-in, nothing more. I closed my eyes, suddenly overwhelmed. In the span of a week, my life had completely transformed. I'd gone from anonymous waitress to valuable pawn in some criminal chess game I barely understood. People I cared about were now at risk because of choices I'd made. And at the center of it all was Dante Rossini, the man whose orbit I'd entered willingly, but whose gravitational pull was proving far stronger than I'd anticipated. Why did they come for me? I asked Marco, needing to understand. What value could I possibly have to a rival family? Marco's expression was carefully neutral. You have access to the Rossini estate, to Antonio during his recovery, to Dante himself. He glanced at me briefly. And Mr. Rossini has shown particular concern for your well-being. That makes you valuable in different ways. Particular concern, such a clinical phrase for whatever complicated dynamic was developing between Dante and me. The remainder of the journey passed in tense silence. When we finally turned onto the private road leading to the estate, I felt a surprising sense of relief at the sight of the familiar gates, the stone walls, the mansion beyond. In just 1 week, this place had become a sanctuary in my mind. Ironic, considering it was home to the very danger that now shadowed me. Dante was waiting in the foyer when we arrived, his face a mask of controlled fury that softened the instant he saw me. In 3 long strides, he crossed the space between us and, to my complete surprise, pulled me into his arms. Thank God, he murmured against my hair, holding me so tightly I could feel his heart hammering in his chest. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? I shook my head, too stunned by his embrace to form words immediately. When he finally released me, his hands remained on my shoulders, dark eyes scanning my face as though confirming for himself that I was truly unharmed. I'm okay, I managed. Marco arrived in time. Dante's gaze shifted to his security chief, the gratitude in his expression requiring no words. Marco nodded once, then discreetly withdrew, taking the other men with him and leaving Dante and me alone in the foyer. I'm sorry, Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. This is my fault. I should have anticipated Calabrese would take an interest in you. Why did they? I asked, needing to hear it from him directly. What would they gain by taking me? Dante's jaw tightened. Leverage. Information. He hesitated, then added quietly, a way to hurt me. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with implications neither of us seemed ready to articulate fully. What happens now? I asked instead. Now you stay here, where it's safe, he replied firmly. We'll arrange for the rest of your belongings to be brought from your apartment. Your mother remains under protection at her facility. Your roommate will be watched discreetly. And how long does this last? I pressed. How long until it's safe for me to return to my normal life? Dante's expression darkened. The situation with the Calabrese family is complicated. It won't be resolved quickly, so I'm a prisoner here. I didn't phrase it as a question. No, he said sharply. Never that. But your safety requires certain limitations for now. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything. When I opened them again, Dante was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite define. Concern, guilt, and something warmer that made my pulse quicken despite the circumstances. Come, he said gently, guiding me toward the main staircase. You must be exhausted. We can discuss the details tomorrow after you've rested. As we climbed the stairs, his hand at the small of my back, I was struck by the bizarre contrast between the danger I just escaped and the luxury to which I was returning, between the fear still coursing through my veins and the undeniable comfort I felt in Dante's presence. Antonio has been asking for you, Dante said as we approached my suite. He was concerned when he heard what happened. I'll check on him after I've cleaned up, I promised, suddenly aware of how disheveled I must look after hiding in a bathroom and fleeing my apartment. At my door, Dante paused, his hand lingering on my arm. Eliza. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, whatever it takes. The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. I believe you. He nodded once, seemingly satisfied with my response. Rest now. We'll talk tomorrow. As the door closed behind me, I leaned against it. Emotions I couldn't even name washing over me in waves. In the span of a single morning, I'd been hunted, rescued, and returned to what now felt strangely like home. All because of my connection to a man whose world was as dangerous as it was alluring. A man who had just held me like I was precious to him, who had promised to protect me at any cost, whose touch and gaze affected me in ways I couldn't deny, no matter how complicated our circumstances. I moved to the window, looking out over the estate's peaceful grounds. Beyond these walls, men from rival families were hunting for me. My mother and friend were under protection because of me. My normal life had been shattered, perhaps irreparably. Yet standing here, in this beautiful room in Dante Rossini's home, I couldn't bring myself to wish I'd never entered his orbit. Whatever was happening between us, whatever dangerous, impossible connection was forming, it felt like something I'd been searching for without knowing it. As the adrenaline of the morning finally began to fade, exhaustion took its place. I showered quickly, changed into fresh clothes, and was about to check on Antonio when a soft knock came at my door. Dante stood there, holding a small box. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a small pendant. Upon closer inspection, I realized the pendant contained a tiny tracking device. "For your safety," Dante explained, watching my reaction carefully. "If you're ever—" He stopped, seemingly unable to voice the possibility. "It would allow us to find you, quickly." I should have been offended by the implication that I needed to be tracked like a valuable possession. Instead, I found myself oddly touched by his concern and foresight. "Thank you," I said, slipping it onto my wrist. Dante nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Antonio is waiting to see you. He's been insufferable since he heard what happened." I smiled despite everything. "I'll go to him now." As I moved past Dante in the doorway, he caught my hand, his fingers entwining with mine for a brief, electric moment. "Eliza." I looked up at him, suddenly very aware of our proximity. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly. "Safe." The way he said safe, like it meant something far more personal than mere physical security, sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear. "So am I," I replied honestly, and was rewarded with a rare, genuine smile that transformed his face and made my heart skip a beat. Whatever storm I'd entered by accepting Dante Rossini's offer, I was now firmly in its eye, surrounded by danger yet paradoxically sheltered by the very man whose world had created that danger in the first place. And as I walked toward Antonio's room, the weight of Dante's bracelet on my wrist a constant reminder of my new reality, I found myself strangely at peace with that contradiction. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange rhythm of normalcy, punctuated by reminders of danger. Antonio's recovery progressed steadily, his strength returning as the infection cleared and his surgical wounds healed properly. My days fell into a pattern, mornings spent helping him with increasingly challenging physical therapy exercises, afternoons checking his vital signs and changing dressings, evenings often spent in Dante's company, as he made a point of dining with me regularly, regardless of his other obligations. The outside threat remained, though Dante was careful not to burden me with details. Security around the estate increased noticeably. More men patrolling the grounds, additional cameras installed at strategic points, identification checks at the gates becoming more rigorous. Vincent drove to the care facility twice weekly so I could visit my mother, but I was never allowed to go alone, and our visits were kept brief and closely monitored. Zoe and I spoke on the phone, but her questions about when I would return home were met with vague responses I hated giving. She knew something had happened. The break-in story hadn't satisfied her journalistic instincts, but seemed to understand my reluctance to share details over the phone. "Just tell me you're safe," she demanded during one call. "Really safe, not held against your will safe." "I'm safe," I assured her. "Genuinely, it's just complicated." With Dante Rossini, I imagine everything is. She wasn't wrong. My relationship with Dante had entered territory I could no longer pretend was purely professional. We hadn't crossed any explicit lines, but the lingering glances, the casual touches, the late-night conversations in his study where he shared carefully edited stories from his childhood. All of it spoke to something deepening between us. Something neither of us seemed willing to name, but both were increasingly reluctant to deny. Antonio noticed, of course. "He's different with you," he remarked one afternoon as I helped him with his exercises. "Lighter, almost happy." I focused on monitoring his form as he completed a set of movements designed to strengthen his core without straining his healing tissues. "I'm sure you're exaggerating." Antonio shook his head. "I've known my brother all my life. I've seen him with dozens of beautiful women at charity galas, business functions, family events. Never once have I seen him look at someone the way he looks at you." I tried to ignore the warmth that bloomed in my chest at his words. "We're in an unusual situation. It creates a false sense of intimacy." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Antonio grinned knowingly. "Because from where I'm sitting, there's nothing false about it." I changed the subject quickly, uncomfortable with his perceptiveness. But his words lingered in my mind that evening, as I prepared for dinner with Dante. He'd been called away to the city for business that morning, leaving with a tight expression that suggested whatever awaited him was unpleasant. Marco had remained behind to oversee security at the estate, which felt like both a courtesy to ensure I felt protected, and a subtle reminder that I was still, in some ways, a valuable asset to be guarded. I chose a simple dress from the new clothes that had appeared in my closet shortly after my hasty return to the estate. Another of Dante's thoughtful gestures that I'd stopped pretending to object to. The deep blue silk was more elegant than anything I'd have chosen for myself, but I'd learned that in the Rossini household, even casual dining called for a certain standard of dress. Dante was waiting in the smaller dining room, standing by the window with a glass of scotch, his back to the door. He turned as I entered, and the expression that crossed his face, appreciation tinged with something darker, more possessive, sent a shiver of awareness through me. "Eliza," he said, setting his drink aside and crossing to pull out my chair. "You look beautiful. Thank you." I sat, hyper-aware of his proximity, as he took the seat adjacent to mine rather than across the table. "How was your business in the city?" A shadow crossed his features, productive, if not pleasant. He signaled to the waiting staff to begin serving. "The Calabrese situation is evolving." "Is that good or bad?" "Potentially both." He took a sip of his wine, considering his next words carefully. "They've proposed a meeting. Neutral territory, limited security on both sides." My pulse quickened. "To discuss what?" "Various points of contention," he replied vaguely, then added, "including their unfortunate interest in you." The reminder that I was now a bargaining chip in some Mafia negotiation was sobering. "When is this meeting?" "Tomorrow evening." I absorbed this information as the first course was served, a delicate soup I barely tasted. "Will it be dangerous?" Dante's expression softened slightly. "There's always an element of risk in these situations, but we'll take precautions." His hand moved to cover mine on the table, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't need to concern yourself with the details. I think I'm already rather deeply concerned, considering men were sent to abduct me from my apartment," I pointed out, but without heat. I'd come to understand that Dante's instinct to shield me from the uglier aspects of his world stemmed from a genuine desire to protect, not to control. He conceded the point with a slight incline of his head. "Fair enough. But I promise you, Eliza, I won't allow harm to come to you or to those you care about." The conviction in his voice was absolute, and I found myself believing him despite the inherent dangers of his world. Over the past weeks, I'd seen glimpses of the power he wielded, the respect and fear he commanded among his associates. If anyone could keep a promise of protection, it was Dante Rossini. "Antonio seems much better," I said, deliberately changing the subject to safer ground. "Dr. Kiernan is pleased with his progress." "Thanks to your care," Dante replied, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of my hand, sending sparks of awareness up my arm. "He told me today that you're the best thing that's happened to our family in years." I smiled, genuinely touched. Despite the circumstances that had brought me here, I'd grown fond of Antonio and his irreverent humor, his surprising intelligence, his unwavering loyalty to his brother. "He's a good patient, most of the time." "High praise indeed," Dante murmured, amusement warming his dark eyes. though I suspect his cooperation has more to do with his nurse than with any natural inclination toward following medical advice. The meal continued in comfortable conversation, Dante skillfully steering us away from the darker topics that loomed over tomorrow's meeting. By dessert, a chocolate confection that would have made the pastry chefs at the Altezza envious, a pleasant warmth had settled between us, born of good wine and better company. "Walk with me," Dante suggested as the staff cleared our plates. "The gardens are beautiful at night." The evening air carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine as we strolled along stone paths, illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. Security was visible at a discreet distance, shadows moving at the periphery of the gardens, a reminder that even in this peaceful moment, dangers lurked beyond the estate's walls. "I've been thinking," Dante said after a comfortable silence, "about what happens when Antonio no longer needs your full-time care." The question had been hovering in my mind as well. With Antonio's recovery progressing steadily, my original 3-month contract would likely conclude with time to spare. But the threat from the Calabrese family complicated any plans for my return to normal life. "I imagine that depends on how your meeting goes tomorrow," I replied carefully. Dante stopped walking, turning to face me directly. The moonlight cast his features in dramatic relief, highlighting the sharp planes of his cheekbones, the intensity of his gaze. "Even if the situation with Calabrese is resolved, I find myself reluctant to think of you leaving." My heart skipped a beat. "Dante, I know our arrangement began as a business transaction," he continued, taking my hands in his. "A job offer you accepted out of necessity rather than choice. But these past weeks," he paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Things have changed, Eliza, at least for me." I should have reminded him of all the reasons this was complicated. The vast differences in our worlds, the danger that seemed to radiate from his very existence, the power imbalance that had defined our relationship from the beginning. Instead, I heard myself say, "For me too." Relief and something deeper flickered across his face. He reached up to trace the curve of my cheek, his touch feather-light. "I don't have the right to ask you to stay, to choose this life, with all its complications and dangers. But I find I can't bear the thought of you walking away when this is over." "What exactly are you asking?" I needed him to be explicit, to leave no room for misunderstanding. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as Antonio's nurse, not as an employee, but as—" He hesitated, then finished with quiet intensity. "As mine." The word hung between us, laden with meaning I couldn't pretend to misinterpret. Mine. Not quite a declaration of love, but something equally powerful coming from a man like Dante Rossini. A claim, a commitment, an offering of whatever his version of forever might be. "Your world is dangerous," I said, not pulling away from his touch, but needing him to acknowledge the reality. "Yes. People get hurt. People die. Yes. No excuses, no minimizing the truth, and there would always be threats, rivals, enemies. Yes." His fingers moved to tangle in my hair, cradling the back of my head with surprising gentleness. "But there would also be protection, loyalty, resources few others could provide for those you care about." My mother's comfortable room flashed in my mind. The educational trust Dante had established for Zoe's younger brother, another arrangement I'd learned about only after it was done. The security that now shadowed the people I loved, keeping them safe from dangers they didn't even know existed. "And what about us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What would I be to you, really?" "Everything," he answered without hesitation. "My partner. My confidant. The one person in this world I would trust completely." His eyes held mine, unflinching. "The only one I would kill or die for without question." It should have frightened me, that casual reference to violence. Instead, it felt like the most honest declaration he could have made, an acknowledgement of exactly who he was and what he was offering. "I need time," I said finally. "To think. To be sure." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "Of course." His thumb brushed across my lower lip, the touch sending a current of awareness through my entire body. "But know this, Eliza Morgan. Whatever you decide, You have already changed me in ways I never thought possible." Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us, his lips finding mine in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened into something urgent and consuming. I melted against him, my arms winding around his neck as his encircled my waist, pulling me flush against his body. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Dante rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you kneeling in that hotel corridor," he admitted, his voice rough. "That long?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Why do you think I had you brought to my suite that night? It certainly wasn't standard procedure for dealing with clumsy hotel staff." I laughed despite myself, the tension of the moment breaking slightly. And here I thought it was all an elaborate plan to find a nurse for Antonio. "A convenient coincidence," he murmured, brushing another quick kiss against my lips before stepping back slightly, maintaining a hold on my hand. "Though I'll admit, I didn't anticipate quite how thoroughly you would captivate me." We walked back toward the house in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, both processing the shift that had just occurred between us. At the door to my suite, Dante paused, lifting my hand to press a kiss against my knuckles. "Think about what I said," he requested. "But know that whatever you decide, you will always have my protection and support." I nodded, unable to find adequate words for the swirl of emotions inside me. As I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it, touching my lips where I could still feel the pressure of his kiss. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind replaying Dante's words, his kiss, the choice he'd laid before me. By morning, I still hadn't reached a decision, but something had shifted inside me. A recognition that the pull I felt toward him wasn't simply circumstantial or born of danger. It was real, and powerful, and increasingly difficult to deny. Antonio noticed my distraction immediately when I arrived to help with his morning exercises. "Something happened," he declared, studying my face. "With Dante?" I sighed, knowing denial was pointless. We talked about the future. A grin spread across his face. Finally, I was beginning to think my brother would never find the courage. "It's complicated," I protested. "Life usually is." Antonio's expression sobered, especially our version of it. "But if anyone deserves happiness, it's Dante. And you," he added, surprising me. "You've brought light into a house that hasn't seen much of it in years." Before I could respond, Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Miss Morgan, Mr. Rossini requests your presence in his study immediately." The urgency in his tone sent a chill through me. "Is something wrong?" Marco's face remained impassive. "He'll explain." I found Dante standing by the windows in his study, tension evident in every line of his body. He turned as I entered, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. "What's happened?" I asked, immediately crossing to him. "The meeting with Calabresi has been moved up," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're demanding it happen now, this morning, not this evening as agreed." "Why?" "To catch us off guard, to force concessions." His jaw clenched. "It's a power play, designed to demonstrate that they dictate the terms, not us. I processed this, and you're going to go anyway. I have no choice," he said grimly. "Refusing would be seen as weakness. It would escalate the situation further." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air between us. Escalation would mean more danger, more violence, more risk to everyone involved, including me and those I cared about. "I wanted to tell you myself before I left," Dante continued, his expression softening slightly as he reached for my hands. "Security will be doubled here while I'm gone. Marco will remain with you and Antonio. You'll be safe, but what about you?" I wanted to ask. Instead, I nodded, understanding that this was his world, his reality, the dangerous underbelly of the life he'd offered to share with me. "Be careful," I said, squeezing his hands. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, at my acceptance rather than protest. "Always." He drew me closer, pressing a quick, fierce kiss to my lips. "I'll return as soon as possible." I watched from the window as his convoy departed, 3 identical black SUVs with tinted windows, a security measure to prevent anyone from knowing which vehicle carried him. As they disappeared down the long driveway, a sense of foreboding settled over me, as tangible as a physical weight. The hours that followed passed with excruciating slowness. I checked on Antonio, who seemed equally concerned despite his attempts to hide it behind casual banter. I tried to read, to distract myself with mundane tasks, but my thoughts kept returning to Dante, facing unknown dangers because of a situation that now, inextricably, involved me. It was late afternoon when I heard the convoy returning, the sound of vehicles on the gravel driveway drawing me immediately to the window. My relief at seeing all 3 SUVs return intact was short-lived when the front door burst open and Marco appeared, his expression grim. "Mr. Rossini is injured," he said without preamble. "He's asking for you." I was moving before he finished speaking, medical training kicking in as I rushed down the stairs. In the foyer, a group of men were helping Dante from the lead vehicle. Blood stained the left side of his shirt, his face pale with pain, but expression stoic as he waved off assistance. "Eliza," he said when he saw me, attempting a reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It looks worse than it is." I doubted that very much, judging by the amount of blood. "Get him to his room," I instructed, falling easily into nurse mode. "I need my medical bag, clean towels, hot water." The men complied without question, supporting Dante up the stairs to his suite, a space I'd never entered before. Larger than mine and Antonio's combined, decorated in rich woods and deep greens. They helped him to a sitting position on the edge of his massive bed as I assessed the wound. "What happened?" I asked, carefully cutting away his ruined shirt to reveal a deep gash across his ribs. "Disagreement over terms," Dante replied through gritted teeth. "One of Calabresi's men got too close with a knife. The cut was serious but had missed anything vital. Cleaning it and stitching it closed would be painful, but straightforward. This needs sutures," I told him, already preparing what I'd need from my medical bag. "It's going to hurt." "Not my first time," he said with grim humor, then dismissed his men with a sharp nod. "Give us privacy." When we were alone, I began cleaning the wound methodically, trying to focus on the medical requirements rather than the fact that this was Dante, wounded because of a conflict that involved me. "What were the terms?" I asked, needing to know what had happened. Dante's expression darkened. "Calabresi wants territory we control on the west side. Claims it as compensation for past grievances." His hand caught mine as I worked, forcing me to meet his gaze. "He also specifically demanded we turn you over to him." Ice formed in my veins. "Why would he want me?" "Because he knows you matter to me," Dante said simply. "And in our world, anything that matters becomes a potential weakness to exploit." I resumed cleaning the wound, hands steady despite the implications of his words. "And you refused." "I refused," he confirmed, his voice hardening. "I made it very clear that you are under my protection, now and always, that any move against you would be met with the full force of the Rossini family's response." The declaration should have frightened me. The casual reference to violence, the possessive claim, the implication that I was now permanently entangled in his dangerous world. Instead, I felt a strange sense of security, of belonging, that transcended normal concerns. "Hold still," I instructed as I prepared to stitch the wound. "This will sting." Dante didn't flinch as I worked, his eyes never leaving my face. "You're not afraid," he observed. "After everything that's happened, everything you've seen, you should be terrified, yet here you are, steady as a surgeon." "I've had practice," I replied, focusing on making the stitches small and even to minimize scarring. "My mother's treatment sometimes had difficult side effects. I learned to stay calm when needed. It's more than that," he insisted. "Most people in your position would have run screaming from this life weeks ago." I tied off the last suture, considering his words as I applied a clean bandage. "Maybe I'm not most people." "No," he agreed softly. "You're certainly not." With his wound tended, I helped him into a clean shirt, hyper-aware of his proximity, the warmth of his skin beneath my fingers, the intensity of his gaze as I worked. When I finished, he caught my hand, preventing me from stepping away. "The meeting with Calabresi ended in a temporary truce," he said, his thumb tracing circles on my wrist. "But it won't last. Men like Giovanni Calabresi don't forgive perceived slights, and he believes I've taken something that should have been his. Territory? You. Dante's eyes held mine, unflinching. He had plans for Carlo's savior. When I found you first, claimed you for the Rossini family, it became personal for him. The implications turned my blood cold. So even if I were to leave now, go back to my normal life, he would find you, Dante confirmed grimly, use you against me, hurt you for the simple pleasure of knowing it would hurt me in turn, a perfect trap, I murmured, the reality of my situation crystallizing with brutal clarity. Stay and choose a dangerous life with you, or leave and face those same dangers without your protection. Dante's expression softened, his hand moving to cup my cheek. I wish I could offer you a different choice, Eliza. A normal life, free from the complications of my world. Would you really want that? I challenged gently. If you could wave a magic wand and return me to my life as an anonymous waitress, never having entered your orbit, would you? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. Dante considered it with the seriousness it deserved, his thumb brushing my lower lip in that now familiar gesture that never failed to send shivers through me. No, he admitted finally. I'm not selfless enough for that. Having found you, I don't think I could bear to lose you, even if keeping you means putting you at risk. The honesty of his answer moved me more than pretty declarations ever could have. This was Dante Rossini at his most authentic, acknowledging the danger he represented while refusing to pretend he didn't want me in his life despite that danger. I made my decision then, with a clarity that surprised even me. I'm staying. Dante's eyes widened slightly. Eliza, not out of fear, I interrupted. Not because I feel trapped or because I need your protection, but because when I try to imagine going back to my old life now, it feels empty. I moved closer, resting my hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath my palm. Because whatever this is between us, it's worth the risk. Relief and something deeper flooded his expression. With careful movements that avoided straining his injured side, he pulled me to him, his lips finding mine in a kiss that felt like a claiming, a promise, a beginning all at once. I will keep you safe, he vowed against my lips. You and your mother, your friend, anyone who matters to you. No harm will come to you while I draw breath. I believe you, I whispered, and realized with surprise that I truly did. 3 months later, Antonio was fully recovered. My original contract long expired, but my presence in the Rossini household now permanent in a very different capacity. My mother had been moved to a private suite in the east wing of the estate, where the best specialists monitored her care and made her final months as comfortable and dignified as possible. Zoe visited regularly, having finally been told a version of the truth that satisfied her journalistic curiosity without endangering her unnecessarily. The conflict with the Calabresi family had reached an uneasy resolution. Not peace, exactly, but a mutually beneficial arrangement that reduced immediate threats while allowing both families to maintain their pride and territory. I didn't ask for details, understanding that some aspects of Dante's world were best kept separate from my involvement. Life as Dante Rossini's partner wasn't the fairy tale ending of childhood dreams. It came with security protocols, careful monitoring of my movements outside the estate, and the constant awareness that danger lurked at the edges of our existence. But it also brought unexpected joys. Dante's rare but genuine laughter when we were alone together, the gradual softening of his public persona when I was near, the absolute loyalty and protection of the Rossini family that now extended to include me. On a crisp autumn evening, as we walked through the gardens that had become our favorite place for private conversations, Dante stopped beneath the ancient oak tree that dominated the eastern section of the grounds. "I have something for you," he said, withdrawing a small velvet box from his pocket. My heart stuttered as he opened it to reveal a stunning emerald ring set in platinum, the stone catching the fading sunlight with breathtaking brilliance. "This belonged to my grandmother," Dante explained, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "The only woman my grandfather ever loved, despite the complications of the life they shared." He took my hand, his dark eyes holding mine with an intensity that still made my breath catch. "I know our beginning was unconventional, that the life I can offer you will never be entirely normal or completely safe. But I also know, with absolute certainty, that I will never love anyone the way I love you, Eliza Morgan. Tears pricked at my eyes as he continued. You stepped into my world by chance. A broken wine glass, a moment of recognition. You stayed by choice, despite seeing the darkness that shadows everything I touch. You brought light into that darkness, healing not just Antonio's physical wounds, but the deeper ones my family has carried for generations. He slipped the ring from its velvet nest. This isn't a question of ownership or possession. It's a promise that whatever comes, whatever dangers or complications arise, we face them together, as equals, as partners, as family. I extended my hand, allowing him to slide the ring onto my finger. A perfect fit, as though it had been waiting for me all along. Yes, I whispered. The only response needed for the question he hadn't quite asked, but that hung in the air between us nonetheless. Dante drew me into his arms, his kiss a seal on the promise the ring represented. When we finally parted, he rested his forehead against mine, a rare smile softening his features. You saved Carlo's life that night at the Palmer house, he murmured. But you saved mine the moment you looked me in the eye in that hotel hallway and refused to be intimidated. As the sun set over the Rossini estate, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds, I leaned into the embrace of the man who had drawn me into his dangerous world, and then reshaped that world to keep me safe within it. The path that had led me here, from struggling waitress to a mafia boss's fiancé, was unconventional by any standard, fraught with risks and complications I could never have anticipated. Yet standing here, the weight of Dante's grandmother's ring on my finger and the solid strength of his arms around me, I couldn't bring myself to regret a single step of that journey. In saving Carlo's life that night at the Palmer house, I had inadvertently changed the course of my own, finding not just financial security or professional purpose, but a love powerful enough to transcend the boundaries between our very different worlds. Bring her to my suite, Dante had ordered, when he first saw me alone in that hotel hallway, setting in motion a chain of events neither of us could have predicted. Now, as I looked up at the man who had become my protector, my partner, and my future, I silently thanked whatever twist of fate had caused that wine glass to slip from my fingers on that fateful night. Some accidents, it seemed, were truly meant to be.